I spent 3 years chasing massive goals while constantly running on empty. Every morning I'd wake up determined, but by noon I was completely drained. Yet I kept blaming my lack of motivation for my failures. Turns out I wasn't struggling with motivation at all. I was fighting an energy crisis that no amount of inspirational quotes could fix. If you're tired of feeling like you should be capable of more but can't seem to follow through, this isn't another try harder lecture. It's the energy solution I wish someone had shown me years ago. Have you ever wondered why you can spend 6 hours grinding through a video game but can't muster the energy for 10 minutes of work on your dream project? You're not alone. This bizarre energy paradox haunts ambitious people everywhere, and it's not what you think. Here's the truth most productivity gurus won't tell you. What you're experiencing isn't a motivation crisis. It's an energy crisis. We've been misdiagnosing ourselves for years, assuming that if we just wanted it badly enough, we'd find the strength to push through. But your brain doesn't work that way. Your lack of progress isn't because you don't care enough. It's because your energy tank is running on fumes. This fundamental misdiagnosis creates a vicious cycle. When we can't bring ourselves to tackle important work, we conclude something must be wrong with us. We're lazy, unmotivated, lacking discipline. But what's actually happening is that your brain is protecting you from what it perceives as an energy draining threat. I discovered this the hard way. For 3 consecutive months, I set increasingly ambitious morning routines. 5 a.m. workouts, cold showers, meditation, journaling, convinced this time I'd finally build the discipline to transform my life. By noon each day, I'd collapse in exhaustion, barely able to focus on basic tasks. I blamed myself, thinking if I just had more willpower, I could push through. That self-blame only deepened my exhaustion. What I didn't understand then was the science of dopamine depletion. Your brain quite literally functions like a vehicle with a fuel tank. When your energy dips below a certain threshold, what neuroscientists call the biological red line, your brain activates protection mechanisms designed to conserve what little energy remains. This isn't a design flaw, it's a survival feature. Throughout human evolution, energy conservation was critical for survival in resource-scarce environments. When you attempt to tackle work tasks while below this energy red line, your brain creates powerful deterrents. Suddenly, you're hit with a wave of fatigue. Your anxiety spikes, your thoughts become fragmented and unclear. Your brain is essentially throwing up roadblocks to protect your depleted reserves. But here's where it gets interesting and frustrating. Switch to scrolling social media, watching videos, or playing games, and those protection mechanisms mysteriously vanish. Why? These activities generate dopamine without requiring significant energy expenditure. They're the brain's equivalent of free fuel. This explains the maddening paradox where you feel too exhausted to work on your business, but can somehow binge watch an entire Netflix series without issue. Understanding this neurological reality completely transforms how we should approach productivity. When you know you're facing an energy problem rather than a motivation problem, you stop the self-blame cycle and start looking for actual solutions that work with your brain's energy economy instead of fighting against it. The distinction is crucial. Motivation is about wanting to do something, while energy is about having the physical, emotional, and mental resources to actually do it. You can be incredibly motivated to climb a mountain, but if you're running on 2 hours of sleep and haven't eaten all day, your motivation is irrelevant. You simply lack the biological resources to perform the task. This realization was revolutionary for me. I stopped trying to find more motivation and started respecting my brain's energy limits. I began recognizing the early warning signs of dipping below my energy red line. The slight brain fog, the sudden urge to check my phone, the resistance to starting complex tasks. I learned to see these not as character flaws, but as important feedback from my neurological systems. More importantly, I discovered that by working strategically within these limitations, rather than pretending they didn't I could actually accomplish more with less struggle. The key wasn't pushing harder against my brain's resistance. It was redesigning my approach to work with my brain's natural energy patterns. When I redesigned my approach to work with my brain's energy patterns, I discovered something counterintuitive. The smaller my initial action, the greater my eventual output. Most productivity advice tells you to push harder. But what if the most powerful progress technique requires almost no energy at all? Let me introduce you to what I call mousetrap actions. Absurdly small initial actions that bypass your brain's energy conservation mechanisms entirely. These aren't baby steps in the traditional sense. They're even smaller, more like microscopic movements that trigger a cascade of subsequent actions without triggering your brain's energy protection systems. Here's the perfect example. Simply turning on the shower faucet in the morning became my gateway to productivity. Not taking the shower, just turning the knob. This action required so little energy that my brain couldn't justify blocking it. Yet once that water started flowing, I naturally stepped in. One tiny action created momentum that carried me through my entire morning. This flies directly in the face of conventional productivity wisdom. While most advice centers on pushing yourself harder, just do it, rise and grind, no excuses. These approaches actively fight against your brain's biological necessity to conserve energy. It's like trying to accelerate with one foot on the brake. You might move forward through sheer force, but you'll burn through your fuel tank at an unsustainable rate. For months, I felt trapped in what I call a glass cage. I could see my goals clearly, but couldn't seem to reach them, no matter how desperately I wanted to. The barrier was invisible but impenetrable. What I didn't realize was that my brain had built up a collection of what behavioral scientists call negative emotional energy stories around certain activities. These needs were draining my energy reserves before I even started tasks. Writing a blog post wasn't just writing, it was reliving every critical comment I'd ever received. Sending an email wasn't just communication, it was anticipating rejection. Each task carried an invisible energy tax that pushed me below my red line before I'd even begun. My breakthrough came when I created a personal inventory of these energy draining stories and paired each with a corresponding mousetrap action so small it couldn't possibly trigger resistance. For my morning routine, I didn't try to leap out of bed at 5 a.m. anymore. Instead, my only goal was to place my feet on the floor. That's it. Once my feet touched the floor, I'd often naturally stand up. And once standing, I'd often naturally walk to the bathroom. And once there, I'd often naturally turn on the shower. Each action required minimal energy, but created the conditions for the next action to occur almost automatically. Over time, this approach of chaining small, energy-efficient actions together led to tripling my productive hours. Not because I suddenly found more motivation, but because I stopped fighting against my brain's energy conservation mechanisms and started working with them instead. Another powerful tool in this approach is what I call the 10-10-10 decision-making rule. When facing resistance to starting a task, assess how the choice will impact you in 10 minutes, 10 hours, and 10 days. This framework helps clarify the long-term benefits of taking action versus the short-term discomfort of inaction. In 10 minutes, turning on your computer to work might feel uncomfortable. In 10 hours, you'll likely feel relieved and accomplished for having made progress. In 10 days, that small progress compounds into significant momentum. This mental reframing helps overcome the brain's natural tendency to prioritize immediate comfort over long-term benefit. What makes this approach so effective is that it's based on how our brains actually work. Behavioral activation therapy has long emphasized the importance of small initial actions to overcome psychological, particularly for those with limited energy. Implementation intentions, specific plans that outline exactly when, where, and how to act, help bypass decision fatigue by automating responses to certain situations. The transformation I've shared today wasn't about finding hidden reserves of motivation or willpower. It was about honoring the energy economy that governs our productivity and designing a system that works with it, not against it. What the research clearly shows is powerful. People who focus on small, manageable habit formation consistently outperform those fixated on ambitious, sweeping changes. This isn't just theory. It creates what I call the discipline motivation loop, where small actions build discipline, discipline produces results, and those results naturally generate the motivation we've been chasing all along. Your ambitious goals don't require abandonment, they require recalibration. Rather than viewing your limited energy as a weakness to overcome, recognize it as a reality to navigate strategically. The compounding effect of tiny, consistent actions ultimately creates the momentum that massive action promises but rarely delivers. I challenge you today, identify just one mousetrap action for your most important goal. Make it laughably small, so minimal your brain doesn't even register it as a threat to your energy reserves. That first domino, once tipped, can set in motion the very transformation you've been struggling to achieve.